And I want to encourage you tonight to know that as long as we're in the grasp of the hand of the potter, we're all right. If a preacher tells you that you can't, there's no way you can go back on God, well, I'm going to be real nice about that, and I'll just tell you that's not the truth. Just like the prodigal son you read about in the Scripture, many have fallen away, walked away from God over the years. They served Him at one time, and they turned around, they went the other direction. The Bible said that nothing, that's nothing, zero, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Neither height, depth, powers, principalities, things that are, that were, that will to come. I mean, anything. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. But you see, the principal idea that a man comes to Jesus, he accepts Him. It is a willful act of a man's receiving an acceptance of the Lord. You are now in the potter's hand. The Bible said that no man can do what? Pluck you out of the hand of God. So in other words, if you decide you want to serve the Lord, it doesn't matter how your family acts. It doesn't matter how your teacher acts. It doesn't matter how professors, chiefs, officers, judges, chaplains. It doesn't make any difference how anybody acts. Nobody can pluck you out of the hand of God. But the same way you walked into the hand of the potter is the same way that you can walk right out of the hand of the potter if you so choose. It's important to understand that tonight, because every one of us are faced every single day of our life. And I want to talk to you for a minute here. I'm going to try not to preach, but I just want to talk to you every single day of our life, from the time that sometimes I think when you're sleeping, but from the time you get up, the time you go to bed, all day long. How many of you know you're faced with so many challenges and so many temptations and so many things to get you mad? It'll be something somebody posted and you think it's about you. It could be something somebody said and you heard about it. It could be the fact that somebody's in front of you, they're slow poking and won't get out the way. Somebody didn't deposit a check in your bank. They said they were going to. It could be so many things. Am I right? Could be the fact that you made your husband dinner and he acted like it wasn't very good, and you got your feelings hurt. Could be the fact that, your wife ain't said I love you in a while. I mean, so many things that can get us sidetracked every day. But don't ever get out of the hand of the potter. There's a reason why the Lord laid it on my heart to share this tonight. I know there is. Don't ever get out of the hand of the potter. Because the moment that you get a little too far, it makes it so much easier to just go the rest of the way. Brother Billy may have helped me with this. I think I may have preached this up in Tennessee, but I feel like talking about this for a minute again. Brother Benefield, do you mind coming for a minute? I just want to, Brother Billy, y'all just come for a minute. I want to demonstrate something to you. This is just a visual. I want you to stand right over there somewhere, and you stand right over there somewhere. Yeah, and we'll say tonight that Brother Benefield represents the devil. I've done this in the past. And it's just for tonight, so yeah, just for tonight, okay? But he represents the devil tonight. And Brother Billy represents the Lord. I'm just going to give you this easy illustration, make things real plain and simple. There's times in our life we go through things and we come to where the Lord is. We're arm in arm. I want everyone to just pay attention, listen to me, because I don't plan to preach very long. But we're like bosom buddies with the Lord. Man, we're like best friends. Church on Sunday morning, church on Sunday night, midweek service. We're trying to be obedient in all things. We're trying to talk clean. We're trying to live clean. We're praying. We're reading our Bible. And we're trying to say amen whenever the preacher breathes so we can say it, you know. So we're trying to serve the Lord, all right? And we're right here. And there may even be times that we're not quite as close as we need to be, but we're like somewhere over here. You know what I'm saying? But what happens is that these little things I was talking about earlier, they come at us and they do. Come here, Justin. We're just going to say you're like all the little issues and the little things that just distract and bother us. I just want you to kind of be naggy and push on me and stuff, okay? Just push me around a little bit and just kind of aggravate me a little bit. Anyway. So don't mess with my glasses, though. So all throughout your day, and this daily thing represent of everything you go through all the time. The enemy's push. Come on, do your job. Be the devil. It's an advocate. So the enemy is messing with you. You're like the devil's imps. And all these things you're going through, and what happens is you're facing temptations to let up, the things you said you were going to do, and you let back on God, and you say, well, you're right over here, but if the enemy come over here, if the enemy keeps messing with you, if the enemy comes in here and he starts messing with you, yeah, stand right over here. Listen to Jesus. So if the enemy can do this and come between you and your walk with the Lord, he starts aggravating, pushing, tempting you and little things, and then you start looking around you and you start finding ways to justify doing things. Well, sister what's her name, or brother so-and-so, he's a good old guy, and he does this, and she does that. Preacher down the road, I know, he acts that way, and it must be okay. And you find yourself the things you committed to God, and you said, I won't do it again. I stopped doing it. I'm going to serve. I'm going to do this. I've made commitments to God. And some of you may have even gone as far as criticizing other people that do. So the enemy comes in. After a while, what starts to happen is you start letting up a little bit by a little bit. And I've done this so many times over the years, but it's such a reality and an imagery, just like they used in Jeremiah's day. But Brother Benefield, you're the devil. I just want you to just kind of do this ever so often. You stay right where you're at. See, the devil don't have to come exactly to where I am. He just keep on motioning me on, just like he did with Eve in the garden. And so all these things, I give up a little bit here, I give in a little bit there. And here's what I've noticed about church people, okay? I'm going to preach this in a real way. It's midweek service, and I'm out here somewhere. Keep pushing on me. And so I've led up some during the week. So it's church time. And so because it's church time, I may take 2 or 3 little steps back. And so I'm feeling better about myself. And then come Monday morning, here's the enemy again. Here's the same old crazy stuff. And the devil's still I still got the same old friends that I refuse to let go of, because every time I get around them, they're pulling me the wrong way. I'm watching stuff on the internet, on TV. I got all these things, because the enemy's always fighting for the real estate of your heart. And so you give in a little bit. You give in. What I have found, the same way that you ever get your paycheck, it might be $400. And you go to look at your money like that night or the next day, and all you got is like $96 left. You got, there's no way. I dropped a $100 bill somewhere. I had to. They didn't give me my money back somewhere, right? And so then you go counting up your receipts, and you're like, I spent all that much money. It was just $12 here, $10 there, $50 over there, $80 for gas, $50 to sit down at that restaurant we shouldn't have gone, $10 for a smoky big bite and a big gulp and a Slurpee. You understand what I'm saying? And what happens is, little bit by little bit by little bit by little bit, it just adds up. Am I right? Is anybody here in construction? Anybody ever worked with a tape measure? Do you know, stay right there. Do you know that you can take a tape measure and you can get off, you measure, a few feet, and you can get off a 1/16 of an inch. And then you can take your tape measure and pick up where you left off here, measure over and get a 1/16 off. If I do that enough times, I can be a 1/2 inch off because of a few 1/16 of an inch. That is an illustration of how that gradually, that one time that we were close, we were on fire. Then we get embarrassed to go back to church because we're afraid Brother Myers or Sister Myers, somebody's going to look at us funny because I've been in a while, all that stuff. Never let that hinder you, because I'm going to love you the same if you hadn't been to church since Moses crossed the Red Sea or Kermit's in somebody else's business again. So you're going to be right here with the Lord, and the next thing you know, gradually, little bit by little, the enemy just keeps pressing, keeps prodding, keeps bothering you, keeps nagging, tempting you. And then what happens is you start getting a little bit closer. Then what happens is, through the process of you justifying, well, the reason I do this and the reason I do that. You want to tell you what else people do that drives me crazy? It's not enough to just be satisfied that you're not where you need to be and you just live with the fact that you got yourself where you are. Then you got to put the church in the mix of everything and start blaming. Stay right there. You start blaming the pastor. You start blaming the church, where the church, they don't do this, or the church don't have this program, or the church, or this or that. The church's music is too, the pastor preaches too long, or somebody didn't shake my hand right, or they didn't smile at me a certain way. Listen, the minute that your salvation hinges on how well somebody shakes your hand or whether somebody smiled at you, and if you're going to compromise because of all this crazy stuff, you don't have nobody else to blame but you. You got yourself there. You can't blame nobody else. Well, it's their fault. No, it ain't. It's your fault. You're the one that let in. You're the one that give in. So you keep getting farther, and what happens, you start trying to justify your reasoning. And I have met people that will start finding reasons to get mad at good people. I told you I wasn't planning on preaching, but I guess I am. This ain't I usually preach wide open, so when I do this, it don't seem like preaching to me. But you start finding ways to be mad. Find me a backslider and tell me if I'm not telling you the truth. They find excuses to be mad. They didn't look at me. See, I went into the church last night and they didn't even shake. They don't even care that I'm there. All this crazy hoopla. You don't never know what somebody's going through. They could have had the worst day of their life, and you're all worried and been out and thinking everything's about you, and it might not have a thing to do with it. And even if they did have a problem, pray for them and keep serving the Lord. He ain't never done me nothing but good. So you keep messing around, and the next thing you know, you finally get to a point where you're so far away, people start thinking things like, they look back and they think, well, I'm not too far away. I just go to church. Man, what a mess. You get it in your mind, well, I just one church, so I just go back to church and everything will be fine. Well, you know, even if God shows you the mercy and the grace, am I right when I say when you miss a lot of ground, when you have so much that you have lost in that period of time. I have known of preachers that were good friends of mine that backslid on God. I want you to listen to me because evidently the Lord put this on my heart for the reason. But I know preachers that have backslid on God in the past. And before they fell away from God, they could get up and preach an entire sermon with just glancing at their notes and preach some dynamic messages. They backslid, and I've had several that have told me the same thing, that when they came back, they were gone for a few years. They said when they came back, they said every time they preach now, it is such a struggle because they lost a lot of ground. They said, now if I don't have notes, I can't preach. You see, I'm not saying that every situation is that way, and maybe God will forgive you and show you grace, but stop living with the intention, well, I'm going to sin, and then I'll just pray later. That is premeditated sin. And I cannot promise you that God is going to forgive premeditated sin. Are you sure, preacher? Well, let me put it in this perspective. I've said this and used this over the years. If you look across the street and you say, that woman walking across the street over there, she's a good-looking woman. I'm going to have an affair with her, and I'm going to ask God to forgive me when it's all over with. That's premeditated sin. You're taking the grace of God for granted, and if God smiles down and forgives you, you better thank your, as they say, lucky stars, because it's premeditated sin. But the same thing happens with people. They say, well, I'm just one service away. I'm not too far away from God. I'm not that far away from God, and you keep doing that stuff. And you keep going service after service without really burying your head in the altar and praying like you need to pray, getting a hold of God. You let every other excuse why you can't get a hold of God. Honey, it ain't got desperate enough. Because when you finally get to the place that you get desperate enough, does anybody want to testify to me? Has anybody here had a desperate situation recently? Huh? And what happens when you get desperate? When you get desperate, you pray desperate. Come on, am I right? And that, why does it take desperate measure to get our attention? So if you won't pray now, that's all right. Sit back. Desperate times, problems are coming your way, because if that's what God has to do to get your attention, He'll allow it to happen, because your soul is much more important than a few years here on earth. As you get way over here, and then what starts happening, you say, you know what, I've messed up, I've failed, I've done so much wrong. You look how far you've come, and then the devil gets in your ear and he says, you know what, just do it. Just jump off the deep end. Just leave the church. Don't ever turn back. And all of this. I'm going to tell you a little story, and I'm going to try to hush. I've shared this over the years, and I told you many times, as long as I'm pastoring here, you're going to have to hear a few of these stories more than once. But several years ago, my wife and I, we were at a church. I believe it was a revival. And there was a young lady at that revival. And I don't want to dramatize it or over-explain it, but if I was to say that a young lady that was the epitome of purity and holiness, and if I could, the closest thing I can think of as a young lady that might be like a modern-day Mary, you know. This young lady she lived a holy life. She lived pretty straight, and she served God in many ways. She's just a very quiet, very humble, meek girl. She didn't say a whole lot. She wasn't braggadocious. She wasn't one of these that get on Facebook and take pictures and pull their front of their shirt down to show off and all that other foolishness. She's just a very discreet young lady, serving the Lord. And there she was in that meeting, and she started dating this boy. And I didn't know nothing about him, but I got in this church service, and is anybody with me when I say I cannot stand to see people hypocrite on God? Because it just gives the church a bad name. If you're not going to serve God, if you're going to make the claim, don't shame the name. But he got in church there, and I didn't know this boy had this reputation, but it's not the first time he had done this. But he romanced this young girl. Got talking with her, and you know, a lot of times young girls, they could be pretty, they could be not so attractive, and they face so many different things that they feel like that they're not good enough, you know. Well, he comes along and he flatters her with beautiful words and tells her how beautiful she is. Next thing you know, he's got her hook, line, and sinker. She thinks he's the best thing walking. And the next thing you know, here we are in the service one night. We're praying, and I believe it was revival. We had a powerful service. The Spirit of God was moving. And I remember Sister Myers and I, when we were evangelizing, we spent a lot of time either preaching or praying. It's two things. And I was going around and I was praying for different people. And this young boy, when I went to pray for him, he started jerking and he rolled on the floor and flopped around a little bit. And some people have been around this so long they know how to fake it, even when it ain't really there. I believe in the real thing, but I don't care for the fake. And as soon as I laid my hand on him, the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me. I don't claim to be a prophet, and I haven't had this happen as many times as maybe some. But the Spirit of God spoke to me and said, "They've gone too far." And as soon as the Lord spoke that to me, it scared me, worried me. And I thought, you know, you ever feel like God's telling you something, you kind of question yourself at first? And I laid my hand on her head and I began to pray, and I felt a spirit of heaviness. And what it was guilt. So on the way home that night, we had a long drive back home. I think it was like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hour drive. My wife and I, when we evangelized, we'd drive way out of town, and I'd work late and get home and have 2 or 3 hours of sleep, get up and do it again the next day, go to work. But on the ride back home, we're riding down the road, and I looked over at my wife, and I said, I was praying the altar tonight, and I said, I laid my hand on so-and-so, and I said, the Spirit of God spoke to me and said, they've gone too far. And she looked at me and she said, I don't know about that, honey. She said, are you sure? You see, this young girl was such a sweet young girl. I mean, just you can't imagine. It's just so crazy. It'd be the last person on the face of the earth that any of us would pick to do something outside, because she was so strong and serving God, everything she did. So my wife didn't really totally agree with what I was saying, and it wasn't that she was trying to be rebellious. She just couldn't see that either. Well, the very next day or a few days after that, I was talking to another brother who was related. And I shared with him what I felt, and I could see in his face that he was telling the truth. Some people, they just jump on board with stuff, and they act like, oh, yeah, God told me that too, and God didn't tell him nothing. But I could tell in his face whenever I looked at him, Brother Benefield, that he was telling the truth. He said, brother, he said, God showed me the same thing. And I said, I told Sister Myers last night on the way home, and I said, I'm troubled. I was so overburdened in my spirit, just burdened. While we were out there on the porch and we were talking about the need to pray for both of them, our phone rings. My wife goes to get the phone, and I looked at my wife. I said, it's her, ain't it? It was that young girl. She called my wife. Why, of all people, I don't know, but she called my wife. Still remember it to this day. She told my wife, she said that they, for lack of a better way of putting it, they went too far. More than once. And she wanted my wife, because she worked at a little grocery store, she wanted my wife to go in because she was so embarrassed, because she had tried to uphold her testimony in the Lord, and she didn't want anybody to see her go in there and buy a pregnancy test, and wanted my wife to go buy a pregnancy test for her. And I don't remember exactly what my wife did, but I remember going to the parking lot. I think she may have bought it herself. But I told you all that because I want to bring something out. And she cried, and she told my wife, and I believe myself, and my wife relayed it to me. What happened and how she got there is exactly how a lot of people make the mistake and they fall out of the will of God. Was because right at the climax of all of this, you know, he's pushing himself on her, and he's trying to push things a little too far. And this guy had a habit of doing this, and he looked at her one day and he said, you know what? He said, the Bible said if you look upon a woman in lust, you've committed adultery in your heart already. So, I mean, we've already sinned. We might as well. And the rest is history. I told you all that to tell you that the enemy will use whatever crazy thing he can, and he'll use anybody he can to strip your position, your anointing, your ability to touch the life of somebody else right out from underneath you. And it's going to be up to you whether or not you let him do it or not. Stand tonight. We're going to close. I had absolutely zero intention of talking about any of this tonight, but I know there's a reason, and God knew exactly what was needed to be said tonight, so I'm just going to ask you to take it for what it's worth. Because just as I showed you that the devil's on one side and Jesus is on the other side, I don't care if you got all the way over here. I don't care if you're 3/4 of the way, halfway, or if you're just a couple feet from where the Lord is. The best place for you to be is pretty obvious. Get as close to the Lord as you can. Because what I find is when a trial comes, when heartache and hardship comes, it's an awful, difficult thing whenever you have some junk hit your family, your house, somebody dies, and all this kind of stuff, and you're way over here. And you got to face the reality that maybe it's your loved one that you're supposed to be able to pray for them, but you can't get a prayer off the ground because you ain't where you need to be.